Thanks for joining us on Map, on Mission. My name is Scott Rogers, and today we're going to continue our series of conversations around the very real topic of church hurt.
I stepped in an ant pile this weekend.
At the church? Hashtag church hurt.
I did. I stepped in.
It's already off the rails.
At night, I looked down and I had hundreds of ants.
You stepped
on
in
my
Were they like
feet.
red fire ants?
They lit me up.
Did you just go dip your foot in the pool or what?
I ran real fast into the house and went straight to the shower, and I was still getting bitten.
Bitten?
Bited.
Once bitten, twice shy.
So sorry.
Remember that song?
Who was it?
Great White?
Great White.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is the best way to start a conversation around church hurt, is to talk about fire ants.
Speaking of bites.
Speaking of bites,
Yikes.
people can bite.
They can and do.
I think another great way to maybe tee up this we're being a little bit lighthearted, just to start. But you're wearing your Cubs jersey because what's going on today?
Hey, listen, every
You
3
you lose a bet.
No, I don't appreciate that. No, every 3 years the Chicago Cubs home team come into town.
Is it
and,
only 3 years?
every 3 years they come into town, and so this is the year, and we've had I've had some very gracious friends from the Met that have said, "Hey, I think." 'Cause they certainly don't want to go to that game,
No,
so they
no,
gave me
they're
the tickets
like-
to go to that game. So
Yeah.
I'm getting to go to the game tonight, and I'm going tomorrow night, and then someone's taking me and Jennifer to the game on Wednesday night.
Holy moly.
So I'm going to be MLB fan deluxe.
Well, it
Wow.
is nice to be the boss.
So you can spend about $600 on food is basically what you're saying.
No, man,
What would
Tuesday nights is dinner is
It's
dollar
Dollar
dog
Dog
night.
night
So
at,
nothing to it. I think the most money I'm going to
Minute
spend
Maid.
is probably getting my youngest an ice cream in a cup in the hat.
Yeah,
Mhm.
It's got she really likes
Yeah.
that for some reason.
it's that
so
$9 scoop of ice
Yeah.
cream.
Got two
It's
scoops,
well worth it.
$9.
It's well worth it.
So call it right now. It's a 3-game series, and who wins the series?
Man,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say Chicago takes 2.
Wow.
All right.
The Astros are really good.
Well, this will come out after that, so we'll be able to
You'll be
tell.
able to verify.
Yeah. We've got a lot going on in Houston right now. We've got a downpour.
Ugh.
It's like torrential, biblical proportions.
Powers out at the office.
Powers out
across
at the
street.
office. Thunder, lightning, and I sound like I've been up all night.
What's wrong with you?
I haven't been up all night. Allergies going crazy. So let's go. Let's
Okay.
get after it.
All right.
if it's
do you
not
sound like?
me,
I guess this is just my normal thing.
just your normal
Yeah.
thing.
I don't have allergies. I'm not going to a baseball game.
You always just sound like this.
I just sound like this in real person.
Wow.
In real person.
Yeah, live. This is me live.
We can work through that.
Yeah.
So we talked in the previous 2 episodes, Darren and I, we talked about what is church hurt, and we basically just shared a little bit, Darren mostly from his story, like defining what it was for you. And we realized there's a spectrum of this because there's pain in every relationship with people and even in relationship with church. And we talked about the just how wide that spectrum could be. It could be a little bit, but gets under our craw and stays there for several years, or it's something really bad and it really messes you up for a while. We talked about how to walk through it without running from it, and basically going towards Christ and allowing Him to be the one that can bring healing. And today we just want to talk with a little more detail around how, in finding healing, how do I start to trust again? How do we start to trust other followers of Jesus? How do we find community? And maybe even how do you start to trust the church again? And that's a hard thing depending on what kind of church hurt one has walked through. Matt, you have been doing ministry for a while. You've been pastoring for a while. You've led through a lot of things. And what's your observation, your thoughts on the reality of church hurt and how important it is to seek healing from it if it's happened to someone?
Yeah, as I'm listening to you, the first thoughts that come to my mind are just this consistent calling back to the relationship being the most critical piece of why God's made us, both for relationship with Him, relationship with each other. So if there is no relationship, then it does make hurt a lot more difficult. What that ends up being is it ends up being something value-based. So if something happens and somebody did something that was against your personal value system, they said something from the stage that you didn't agree with, they didn't, a pastor, you have a value that he needs to come see you when you're sick, but for some reason he or she didn't make it to you. Nobody came and visited you. So we take reasons like this outside of relationships and we call that church hurt because they didn't meet my expectations of what I think that role should or shouldn't be about.
Yeah.
But then you add relationship to it where you get to know people, and then you embark on those same situations, or sometimes it's something what would seemingly be insignificant. And it can be a huge, blow up because you have this deep connection with someone. And I don't know why it's as difficult as it is, I guess, but I think within the context of like a marriage relationship, it's almost like I tell myself I have to fight through this because this is my bride. We've committed, for better or for worse. But when it pertains to my friendship, when it pertains to the relationship with my church, there's too many other choices out there, and society has really led me to believe, hey, you know what? We probably should just go look for something else. And what we end up doing, I think, is crippling the Church of Jesus because we don't strengthen her relationally, and then also we probably end up carrying offenses around in our pockets for years and years and years and years. And it's really difficult to trust anybody when you're holding on to your own trauma as tightly as we do.
In your brain, you're taking it somewhere else. Like I can remember getting a phone call from a student pastor friend of mine in the city where we were, and like he called me to warn me about who was visiting our church. Like he was like, "Look, man, just a little heads up. These people are angry and they're leaving, and they've been spotted over at y'all's place. You need to keep your head on a swivel."
Wow.
And I was like, "Oh, please smoke.
Wow.
I'll get them right back to you as quickly as I can, man." But that's what we do, right? I mean, we carry that stuff to the next place. If there's no healing, we just, you're right. You just put it in your pocket and walk into the next auditorium, the next sanctuary.
I remember, so you think a story I'll share is you mentioned a little bit about expectations and realizing church hurt happens. And we even mentioned in our last conversation, sometimes you're completely the victim. There's other times when we kind of contribute to it. Like in places I've been hurt in my relationship with the church, I've contributed to that. I've had my little slice of the pie. Maybe it was bigger than a little slice, but you know what I mean? And sometimes it can come from just an expectation that's a little too high for everyone to hit every time. And I remember I was literally sitting in the house one day, and I'm kind of fumbling through Facebook Messenger. And all of a sudden, my feed populates with all these messages that I had never seen. I mean, it just went, I'm like, what is this? And I'm looking through, I'm like, oh, they sent me a message. And these are from 2 and 3 years ago. They just suddenly showed up out of nowhere. In one of them, a guy had sent me a message and said, "Hey, you've been speaking at my church for a while." And he said some very complimentary things. And he asked, "Hey, could I talk to you? We're just wondering if you could really help me out because my marriage, it's fallen apart and I don't think it's going to last. I just need someone to talk to." And it pops up on my phone 2 years after he sends it. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. So I literally sit there and just message him back and say, "This is the craziest thing. The first I've ever seen this. I'm so sorry. It just came through. How are you doing?" And he says, he replies almost immediately. He says, "Oh my gosh, I thought you were the biggest jerk in the world because you never responded when I was in pain and when I was in need." And he said, "We made it through. We're doing okay." But it just reminded me of sometimes when we're hurt, not all the time, but sometimes the person who's hurt us has no idea that they've done it, and it really isn't their fault. Like we have an expectation, or maybe they weren't able to visit at the hospital because their child was playing in the baseball game and they've missed 6 baseball games, all that kind of stuff. And so how do we heal from that is we just realize, well, Pastor Daren's not the villain. I have a different enemy. Let's not let it be him. But sometimes it just happens and you realize, oh, they're human. okay, I can move on because I realize Matt's a human being. He's just as fallible and imperfect as I am.
if not more.
Well,
I don't feel like you needed to look at me to say that. No, but I do remember a book that we read, and I don't theologically condone everything he says when he writes, but a guy named John Bevere wrote a book called The Bait of Satan, and we read this as a staff. Do you remember this a few years ago? And it's the power of an offense and what it does to you internally as you hold that, and how it and we've heard the old adage, right? Bitterness is like unforgiveness, and it's like you take poison and expect it to kill the other person, right? It's just this pill that we swallow and we maintain it. And there's something super interesting that's happening with our brain chemistry and the way that it interacts with our emotions, and how we process pain has got to shift and it's got to change. But I fear that the vast majority of people sitting in our pews and our chairs on Sunday mornings are living with some semblance of not just pain, but church-related pain. I think it comes back down to expectations that are left unmet. And man, what a tough situation, but what a beautiful thing if we could, really learn to build trust with other people as it pertains to building trust with Jesus' church again, and how we could forgive people in the right way, and processes, giving people tools to move through those types of things, because those are really muddy relational conversations. You and I have had several of these in our decade plus of relationship, but I can honestly sit here next to him today and say, had we not, we wouldn't be able to sit here and look at each other in the eye at all.
No, I wouldn't be here.
And so that fight in the moment, it just feels like a fight. You both have your own part that you play, and you both have the own victim that you play. And it's kind of not really, it's kind of the equation of all of that put together that creates the weirdness. And I don't think people are adequately equipped to deal with some of this stuff.
so how do we get somewhat equipped maybe in this conversation? Because something that is part of our culture here at the Met Church is this kind of this phraseology that says, don't pick up your ball and go home, but fight for a relationship. And when any of us do relationship together for any length of time, there's going to be tension, there's going to be disagreement, there's going to be things to walk through, right? And it's that reality of, if I am averse to fighting for a relationship and I just pick up my ball and go home, I can only go so far as my previous level of bitterness that exists in me, or my previous, level of engagement to walk through this with the last time around. And how have you guys found, as you've found, let's just use the word healing. It could be relational healing. It could be emotional, whatever it is. In your journey together, maybe Daren, could you just start by speaking to what Matt's saying and how you guys have walked together through what you've been through, and how you fought for it? Like, what did you have to do to stay in the fight for relationship instead of doing what I've done before and just picked up my ball and gone home?
I'll just, I would say my initial response was to do that. Like, I was angry and mad and all the words. And so my initial response, specifically when I went off staff here at the Met, was it was fight or flight. I didn't feel like fighting, so I just kept my mouth shut and tried to disappear. One of the key things that happened was my wife Ashley was not willing to do that. She wasn't willing to just run from this deal. And so especially initially, she came to you that day with a whole letter that she had written out and made you sit there and listen and not interrupt her. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
It was a lot of fun with it.
I loved it. It was great.
So did she say, hey, listen and don't say a word? Like, what was...
No, she just said, I have some things that I wanted to share my heart, and if you wouldn't mind letting me get through it before we discuss it. And I obviously said 100%.
What a great move.
So in our situation, she initially was the one who was working to salvage the relationship. Because we didn't believe at that time that we needed to necessarily just abandon ship. We didn't start visiting other churches. Ashley was still very involved around here. And it took time to create the space where I think we could start talking through some of the stuff, right? I think that's part of it. You know, when you're trying to heal brokenness in a relationship, some folks want to just jump on that as fast as they can and get it over with so we can move forward.
Make a transaction out of it. All right, let's do this and get it done.
I think there's got to be a little bit of, you got to be willing to pump the brakes a little bit, I feel like. You've got to be willing to let the emotions settle, let the feelings normalize. And then you can actually sit down. Matt, you always say this. Then you can sit down and you can, instead of me against you, you against me, then we sit down and we go, okay, what was actually going on here? Like, what was the thing that was happening?
So you objectively, as much as you can, look at the situation.
That's why I think
observe
you like in my situation, I had to have some time to even be able to
decompress,
to see this even was out there.
Okay.
And when we can do that, then we have really healthy conversations, to where you've said this before. You guys, you and Jennifer, cared enough about Ashley and our family that you didn't want this to go bad. And that's part of it. You have to not want it to go bad. It's easy to let it go bad.
You almost expect it to, right? You're waiting for the shoe to drop if you've experienced any relational.
Yeah. Because I want to confirm that you are who I think you are.
Totally.
Right?
Mm-hmm. So now, and my counselor, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but my counselor said this to me recently. He said, you will get what you're looking for. And so the difficult thing, and I would say if you're writing anything down as you listen, would be you've got to begin to believe the best, even if you have experienced the worst. Like, you don't know what happened. You're not sure why it happened, but it happened. That they didn't happen. It happened. I always use a water bottle, because if you take a water bottle and I hold it up between me and someone else and I look at them, they look distorted and funny, and that's why we do funny mirrors and spooky houses and all that. It looks weird and you get a distorted image. And that's what we do with trauma. We look through it at a person and we get a wrong image of said human being behind the... And that's what Daren's referring to is, hey, why don't we take that water bottle and set it over here and let's both of us get on the same side of the table and let's try to talk about it objectively. But taking your hand down and putting that thing over here, to your point, both parties have to be able to go, yeah, I want this to work out. And if this is going to work out, we know that this is actually already at that point, there's healing. And now let's talk about the issue at hand.
So you asked, Scott, what are some ways that we can become more equipped? There has to be at least one person in the relationship that is willing to do the hard things, right? You have to be willing to do hard things. You've got to decide, am I going to do the hard thing to get the best thing, or am I just going to take the easy way out? Like, brain science will tell you that your brain wants you to take the easy way out. It's less work, less energy spent.
Created to survive.
Yep. But that's this is not what relationships do, is just bounce anytime there's a little bit of hurt or there's a little bit of confusion or there's...
and I'll insert, or if there's a lot of hurt.
Or if there's a lot of
confusion.
hurt. Yeah. Yeah. Somebody has got to be willing to at least start the process of healing.
So if I'm the one who's been hurt, let's just say you hurt me. We're just hypothetical here. And you don't realize the depth of which I've been affected. Now, what you did might be all of what's really affected me deeply, or it just might be the way I processed what you did. And so I'm sitting here and I'm hurting. And you may not know it, so you're moving on. Or you may know it, but you're still moving on. or you're not being the stronger one in it.
Yep.
So often, and correct me if I don't speak into this, the one who's been hurt the most often has to become the one who's going to lean in and try to mend the relation or lead the way. Is that right? Because they're the ones that are thinking about it all the time.
Well, let's go back to our situation.
Uh-huh.
In no way, shape, or form was I ready to be done.
Mm.
And the difficult thing is, in our situation, it was a both and. So I was, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, I was caught between a rock and a hard place in my own reasoning, which is I feel like Daren's not in a healthy place. He's not giving it everything he's got. And he's like, but I am, because that's all I've got. It was just a very strange, but I'm over here saying, yeah, but I've got an entire staff going, hey, what the heck? And I'm trying to, it was just a mess. So when that, like, hey man, I think you need to take a break. And not just from here, like, you need to go get well. That was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. So in that moment, I would say that I had done the hurting, and Daren was the one that was hurting, and Ashley too. But when you're the one that's actually, let's say, I'll just play this out. When I don't know where the pain resides. I'm not sure when it is appropriate to approach, and you can't just call and check in, because it could be seen as some sort of, the way that we are, it's like, oh, you're just trying to make your I feel like I'm not saying much and I'm saying all of it at the same time. So there is a responsibility, and Ashley took the initiative to his point to say, hey, we want to work through this, but I need to get a few things off my chest. And I go, and I have to be willing at that point to say, hey, no matter what is said that could trigger me, or I could go defensive, to say, nope, she and he mean more to me than being right, being wrong, being misconstrued, being misunderstood. Who really cares? And that's the question I don't think many people, like, that takes a lot of guts from both parties to sit and to allow someone's, even, let's say what Ashley wrote to me was only 50% true. Well, I could choose to be defensive, but can you imagine what would happen to her, who finally got the courage to sit down, say some hard things, if I would have said, hey, you know what? Can you just stop for a minute? That is not true. Like, if I would have done that, Ashley's never coming back in my office ever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I've got to have the emotional maturity to say, this is my sister. Bare your soul. Tell me you hate me today. Because if I have the shoulders to receive it, then maybe there's room for you to love me tomorrow. But if I can, it's like you're driving a wedge into that relationship farther and farther and farther until you come to my side and hear it, see it, and do it my way. They're never going to do it and see it your way. They have their own pain. It's crazy.
Wow.
And so it's very complex. And both parties, again, you got to be willing to see the best in the person. And I would say you also need to be willing to trust God in the other person. Maybe you don't trust the other person fully, but do you trust the God in that person? That he can transform their life, that he can change their point of view, that he can bring them, that he's walking them around us? Yes. And if so, if it's Ashley or Daren or you or me, changing my mind is my response to God. It's not my response to you. That's his role in my life. And that's hard. That's hard to walk through.
You're saying it. I mean, what I keep hearing is courage.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to be courageous and fight for the relationship.
And that's so hard, man. It's such a difficult step to put yourself out there and not know what a response is going to look like. Somebody has to be willing to go. You said it. To go. Whatever happens here, I'm just gonna take it. I'm not gonna agree with all of it, but I'm at least gonna own my part. And I think we have a natural aversion to owning our part a lot of times because that makes us feel bad. That makes us feel less than.
Yeah.
But we're all in the boat.
When you've been when we're hurt, we often want to justify ourselves, right? Like, yeah, they're a villain. They did this, they did that. And again, we're not talking about those scenarios where it was really abusive and yes, they should be put in jail. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. We're talking about most of the other stuff that we can choose what we do with it. And it's difficult to be that one to do that hard stuff, but it seems like God honors it, and that's where the healing's found. If we don't do that, we're going to be living with it for a long, long time.
It's funny. Even now, Ashley is on staff. Daren's kind of filling some part-time stuff right now, and they're both super actively involved here. That doesn't come over time without those initial, conversations of heat and frustration and all the things and staying, being just the call to stay in it, whatever that looks like. And I remember I'd written a book, and I talked about the importance of fight for relationship. It's not a deep dive into change management by any means, but Daren and Ashley's story were part of it. And I asked Ashley and Daren both to read it prior to printing it, because obviously I don't want Daren to open it up six months from now. You probably haven't read it, but still opening up and saying like, "Oh, real cool, Matt.
I'm in your book. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for using us.
Thanks for using me as the bad example."
And Ashley actually came into my office. She's like, I'm not sure how I feel about this, because this isn't the entire story. And I said, Ashley, there's no way. That's a whole book in and of itself. It's not the entire story. It's just the redemptive piece of what was a long, long journey. And I told her, I was like, if it makes you more comfortable for me to pull that out, to change something, I will certainly do that. And after she processed it, I guess she processed that with you as well.
Yep.
It was like, okay, totally get why. And we moved on down the road. But even in that, coming through trauma, coming through turmoil in each other's relationships, I'm over here like, I'm not trying to make a name for myself or doing it. I'm trying to tell a story. And she had emotions, and it charged something in her. We're talking 6 years later, 5 years later, it charged her.
And that's after doing all the work.
Yeah.
So imagine the response had we left and then we somehow found out that Matt's written a book and my name is in it.
That would have gone real well.
Dude, there would have been another one of those conversations.
Yeah, that would have been awesome.
That would have been amazing in so many bad ways.
Well, I appreciate you guys just sharing some perspective on, obviously this could be 20 episodes, because to your point, Matt, it's so complex, and it takes a lot of courage. And I think you guys, though, did give us some great example of how, if we're still in it, how to stay in it, how to fight for the relationship. Someone's got to take the high road, do the hard part, be courageous, and lean in. And I also loved, if I may, before we just wrap this up, how Ashley wrote down those things that she brought to you in that moment. And I have found personally that writing down, like if I'm in a bad place or I'm struggling with someone or something, to write down what it is that I think has happened and how it feels to me, and literally just take it to the Lord in prayer and submit it and just say it out loud and call it what it is, and just sit in that in a posture of reverence and worship. And then just simply, here's what's helped me. And is with something like this, get it all out there, and then say, Lord, why does this affect me like it does? Why do I feel this way? And then just trust him to begin to answer in the moment, in the days ahead. And I have found it affects you because you're prideful. It affects you because you lack low emotional intelligence with that conversation. It affects you because you're thinking of yourself first. It affects you because you don't realize that Matt puts his pants on one leg at a time, just like you do, and you got to think with compassion. All these things. And so I just like how she wrote it down. And maybe if someone's listening and they're kind of in this stuff right now, to name it, write it down, voice it to the Lord, and just submit it to him. And I think it's a big piece of finding healing as well. We're going to do the next conversation. We're going to stay right here. We're going to record another one. And this one might catch you off guard, because we're going to talk about how do we avoid hurting other people. When it comes to church hurt, how do we notice someone's in a vulnerable moment And how do we steward that moment well so that we're not that person who's attached to their church hurt? So we're going to dig into that next time we come back.
Are we going to all switch shirts?
We're going to switch shirts. You can wear the Cubs shirt. We'll
No,
see you
I'm not
guys
wearing the
next
Cubs
episode.
shirt.
Thanks for joining us.
I'll take it.